Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our live webinar where we have an international topic and an international flavour. So I'll let our lovely guests introduce themselves in a little while, and Jane is going to be taking us through the presentation today. But we have Jane, who's just outside Chicago, Mathan, who's in Bonn, Chad, who's in somewhere with a W, Michigan, somewhere in the US, and Celine, who joins us from the centre of the UK in Basingstoke. So a warm welcome to our lovely guests, but also a great welcome to you guys, wherever you are. I hope that lockdown is treating you and yours well. So we are looking today at roughly at international, but more importantly, language and localization. There's no point being international if all you do is speak English, but how do you get the right translations at the right cost, at the right time, for the right people in the right place, and many, many other rights. So Jane's going to take us through some background about how you appear local, and we're going to pick up on some really interesting case studies on RS components, and we're also going to hear live, not from a case study, but a real person with Celine, who's the localization manager from Kingfisher. So I think that's enough introduction, apart from the all-important questions. So if you joined us by computer, you will see on your control panel that there is a questions area. It's there for a reason. Do ask some questions. So as we're going along, I'm keeping an eye on it. If you've got questions of clarification, you want more information, etc., drop it in and I'll ask those as we go through, or save some for the end as well. And just a reminder that you'll get a copy of the presentation mailed to you afterwards, and you can keep it to yourself, share it with your family, whatever you feel like as we approach peak season. But now that's enough for me. Jane Hendricks, tell us who you are and take it away, please.
Sure, thank you for that awesome introduction. So I'm Jane Hendricks. Thank you so much for joining us at this webinar. And I am the product marketing manager for SDL. We're an intelligent language and content organization. And what I cover is machine translation and our linguistic AI portfolio. Now, while Ian says that I'm going to be doing the presentation, I'm actually going to bring up my colleague, Nathan. He's going to really set the stage for what we're talking about, and then I'll come back a bit later and talk to you about the technology foundation, which is really my expertise and my passion. So Nathan, you want to take it from here? And I'll flip the slides. Just let me know when to say, just say next.
Excellent. Thank you, Jane.
Sure.
I'm Madan. I'm very happy that you're joining today's webinar. My background is a computational linguist by heart, sales by passion. I'm the sales director for the EMEA sales team at SDL. And let's dive directly in. I think one of the most important questions we are having is why appearing local is the key to success in global e-commerce. Let's take a step back. I think this is always important. We're looking at brick and mortar stores, which is again generally a good complement to your global strategy to expand further into existing markets and penetrate new markets. But we have been seeing this, and I think 2020 was a very interesting year for that part, that markets are showing that to establish an effective e-commerce presence and to increase your online revenue, it's important to speak your customer's language. And with today's webinar, we would really like to look holistically and also very precisely and effectively, what are the aspects to be considered? Next slide, Jane. Sorry, the one before, that one. Oh, that's not a problem. Let's start with the first thing, and that's finding your store. And I'm particularly mean your online store. That's generally the first step to actually offer your product and services. And this is done through your local language. And by making your product and services accessible through the right language and the content and presented in a more applicable manner is the most focused way of presenting it into a specific market. Generally, I would ask you now who has already localized their website into their local language. But this is not only the only aspect to be considered. Furthermore, we always need to ask ourselves, is it enough to have your website translated into one language or many languages? Doesn't it take more to gain traction, build trust, convert visitors, and of course, repeat the cycle? Now, next slide, please. At this point, I'd really like to look at some numbers and just to point out some interesting facts which we have been observing on the market in the last 2 years. And that's, as you can see on the left side, there is a list. And the list consists of the top 10 countries for e-commerce and where sales have been presented between the year 2018 and 2019. And one particular aspect is very impressive, and that's China has surpassed everybody on the list. In fact, they have surpassed US 3 times as much. They're doing 3 times as much in revenue than the US at almost $2 billion. This goes into, you need to press space. We are at retail growth at 0.5%. The next one. And we have a e-commerce growth at nearly 11%, reaching almost $106 billion in 2020. And this number is, as we can see from the market traction and of course gain, is not going to be decreased. In fact, it's going to more increase. And one interesting aspect I'd like to point out at this point is also smartphones has a huge part to play in this overall e-commerce moving forward into different specific markets. Next one. It's almost at 60% in 2020, and we're expecting almost 70% of the overall market by 2023. But enough about numbers. Let's look at the landscape. That's the next slide. The landscape is changing, as I already said, and we are moving not only by brick and mortar. We need to concentrate and look at things on a global scale. And this also means looking at particular aspects of e-commerce and retail more holistically and as a whole. It has to be more than in-person shopping experience, what we need to offer to our customers and what our customers have been explaining to us. And generally, I tend to ask, is there a secret to it? And the answer is no. There is a shift in the core sales strategy everybody's pursuing. We have online e-commerce to expand their core customer base, and this is generally done through the outside the domestic growth. And as I already said, you need to take a global approach and to focus on particular market to achieve that goal. And what does it mean for you? We need to make the product globally available for providing content locally. This can be done through following a content strategy and content lifecycle by localizing critical apps, websites, and content, but also key factors of SEOs and how are you planning your outreach plan. The right mix of technology and services is to create, deliver, and distribute. And this is the general key of setting up your overall distribution plan and also penetrating specific markets. Successful players on the market pick the right solution according to their needs and letting their trusted partner guide them through this challenging process. And the results, I think, is pretty clear. It's always a tailored online shopping experience to increase your market, which gains again customer trust, a higher conversion rates, and ends in a repeated sale or purchase. While we were looking at these numbers and also the global market, there is always the same question which pops up in our head, and that's, does one size fits all, Jane? And I intentionally didn't introduce my dear colleague, Chad, because he's the one who I would like to ask that. Chad, may I ask to introduce yourself and maybe give me a short answer to that question. Is there one fit which fits all?
Well, Nathan, good question. Look, short answer is this. I think we can all say in 2020 proved this, organizations are constantly changing and evolving, right? We're seeing this. And they shape themselves in the process of going through these transformations and these processes of growth. And these transformations, it has a direct impact on their digital voice, right? So how they speak to their customers, their consumers, whether it's B2B, B2C. And so I think from SDL's perspective, while we've observed all these changes and transformations go on for years and years and years, we definitely see the patterns and use cases kind of surface up, and they all share some kind of fundamental kind of characteristics and attributes. And things like cost or content value or speed to market or ability to scale. So what we're finding, so back to your question, what we find is there's a lot of characteristics and attributes that fit every situation. But in terms of where each company is at within their journey, it can be tailored differently for each of them.
Thank you, Chat. And as you already heard, this is just a sneak peek, because Chat will later on also go into more detail about specific customers. But now enough about the introduction. I think where we want to get our hands dirty is with Jane, who will now give us a more holistic view, what it means to have a content supply chain, looking at the content supply chain and looking at this aspect holistically. Jane, over to you.
Great, thanks, Nathan. So that was a really fantastic foundational presentation, right? So we talked about one size does not fit all, and we'll hear about this throughout the presentation, the changing landscape, the importance of a digital voice. And my role within this presentation is to be the voice of technology, if you will, right? To talk about the technology foundation on which you can build upon. So we're talking about content, and I would say to this day, content is perceived as a very manual process. It's something you can touch, it's very tactile. And yet technology has evolved to the point that it can really help us make it more effective, make it more efficient, help the entire process and lay a foundation for success. And I'm not saying that one size fits all, but it's a foundation on which we can grow and iterate and take it in many different ways. But we need to think about the experience. So I think Nathan talked about e-commerce websites. You need to have different websites, etc., selling your products, but it's not about products and services, because customers aren't buying a product, they're not buying a service, they're actually buying the experience. They're buying into the experience itself, and the way they buy into that experience is by interacting with that digital voice you have, right? So this is from Customer Experience IQ. I picked this because I read this publication, I enjoy this publication, and I've been in technology for a while, so I read a lot of this stuff. You're going to see some fun statistics in this portion of the presentation, but this is not new to this audience. I'm sure this is something that we all know, right? So let's make sure we keep this customer experience in mind. Now, it sounds great, right? The customer experience, we experience it, we want a positive experience. We tend to gravitate towards those brands that deliver a positive customer experience, and yet delivering that customer experience in this digital age is increasingly complex, right? So you have various points of interaction. Your customer is interacting with you throughout mobile, on social, search, display, and we talk a lot about the upfront experience, if you will, right? The consideration, choice, the purchase. But what about the after, right? So once they engage, once the product is purchased, it doesn't stop there, right? The experience continues. It's a continuum. So think about the support. Now you have these points of interaction, and you have these ever-growing channels of engagement. This is not an exhaustive list on either side by any means. I think it would go on and on and on if I actually did it the right way, if you will. So channels of engagement, social channels, Facebook, Instagram, for those of you who are in the B2C space, LinkedIn, Twitter, B2B. And I'm not saying those are exclusive. We mix and match it. TikTok, right? That's emerging as a channel. It keeps evolving. The web, like we can't forget the web. And the web, it's not just a monolithic thing. There's so many things and so many ways to approach it. Forums, discussion boards, right? Places where your customers interact and you may interact with them. That's also a chat. That's a form of engagement. How do you work within that? chat bots, virtual assistants, et cetera, et cetera. So as you notice, there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of complexity. Now, what runs underneath it all, and this brings it back to content. Why do we talk about content? Why is content so very important? I mean, this is what SDL was built to address, because content is the fuel of the modern customer experience, right? So you have these, looks like a planet, right? You have these interlocking continuums. So you have the stages: evaluation, consideration, evaluation, purchase, post-purchase, and what you're trying to achieve, right? What you're actually trying to achieve. At the consideration stage, you want the customer to engage. You want the customer to convert. You want to build loyalty. You want to develop advocacy. You want customers that are going to be advocates to other customers. You do that by putting the right content in front of the right customer at the right time, at the right channel, and making it a cohesive experience, right? Making them feel like they're part of it. Like I said, there's a lot of numbers here, and they're good numbers. So this particular graph actually summarizes a bunch of research that was done by Gartner. So Gartner said, okay, let's look at how folks who deliver relevant content, personalized, fantastic, they're recognized for it, etc., but they're doing it at one stage versus holistically. And what they found is that there's this notion of loyalty leakage. So what does that mean? If you maximize one stage at the potentially expense, or maybe you're just not looking deep enough at all the other stages, it's not necessarily going to get you the same metric as that stage. It doesn't have like a halo effect. There is a clear degradation that happens. So if you think of that total experience, you're not necessarily delivering the total experience, maybe a piece of it, but most certainly not the whole thing. So I think at this point in time, we're kind of convinced, hopefully you're convinced that you need to think about content, you need to think about all the channels, you need to think about these multiple points of interaction, and hopefully by now you're getting a little nervous because it sounds like a lot of work, and we're talking about relevant and what does that really mean? Because I've been in the technology space for quite some time, especially predictive analytics, etc., a lot of times when we say relevant content in the context of personalization, we're thinking of things like it's the right product recommendation, it's in the right form, it has the right words in it, right? We think about the format and we think about the words themselves, but that's not the only dimension, right? So language, if you think about it, assuming you get all of those other things right, assuming it's the perfect words, it's the perfect recommendation, it's exactly what the customer wants. If it's not in a language that they understand, all of that work is compromised, right? Because the reality is that folks want to interact, they need to understand it, they want to be spoken to in their language. It's probably one of the most, if you think of the dimensions of personalization, what is more personal than language, right? That's the most personal thing there is. And as a brand, when you communicate with me in my language across all the channels consistently, it makes me feel like a valuable customer. And the reality is, 78% of customers are more likely to buy from a site in their own language. And in some areas, in some countries, so Japan and France, 60% of online shoppers, they're not even going to buy from a site that doesn't have their native language. It's basically just lost, right? So that market is closed off. 90% of online users choose a native language when it's available. And I think if we think of ourselves as consumers, if we think of ourselves interacting on the web, interacting with customers, of course we want to do that in our own language. I know it makes me feel good, right? Again, like I said, a lot of numbers, and if you don't do anything after this presentation, the one thing I strongly encourage you to do is take a look at CSA Research. They do an awful lot of work in looking at the impact of language on customer experience and what does it mean. There's a couple, I think they're ebooks, articles they've put out. One is Can't Read, Won't Buy B2C, Can't Read, Won't Buy B2B. This chart, this view kind of squishes it together a bit, and it shows, I think, really clearly what is the drop-off numerically from a data perspective if you don't have content available at the right language at the various stages across these various channels, right? So think of it, the channels of engagement and interaction coming together, right? So 73% abandonment if there's no product information in my own language or in the language of the customer you're trying to reach. 73% if you don't have reviews in the language of the customer you're trying to reach. 75% if there's no technical data, and a 41% loss if there's no documentation. Now, clearly that's if you're selling software, but it's important, right? It's important to consider across that continuum. So now not only have we convinced you that you need to think about that holistic customer journey, all of the touch points, all of the points of interaction. I know you get that language is important. And so you really want to get started. How do you get started, right? Because the reality is that content realities are straining the content supply chain, right? So think about this. We have all of these channels, points of interaction, all of the languages. It's not like we have budgets that are elastic. It's not like our budgets are infinite. I wish they were, but they're not. And as a product marketer, I can tell you, I really wish I had an infinite marketing budget. But the reality is that's not the case, right? We have to work within our budgetary constraints. And so when you look at how do I address this growing content, how do I make it more efficient, there's a couple bottlenecks, right? Volume, always a bottleneck. It's just too much. The workload, we have a limited number of resources that are able to do this. And you'll hear about this more when we hear from Kingfisher. I think they will give you a very practical view of that workload perspective. And how do you make decisions, right? How can you make decisions more effectively? All those things are bottlenecks. And this is my favorite part, of course, because I'm a technology advocate. Technology can absolutely reduce and sometimes eliminate that process friction, right? Volume. You have an increasing amount of volume that you need to get out into the global market. You don't have to do it through manual efforts alone. Neural machine translation can absolutely increase the efficiency with which you achieve that goal. Workload. So we talk about automatic translation, but the technology smarts can also help you look at the content itself. It can actually help you analyze what kind is it? Is it difficult? Is it this? Is it this? And using that, it can intelligently route it to the right resources to address it. And sometimes that resource is a machine, sometimes that resource is a person, and sometimes that resource is a combination of person and machine, right? So it's a cyborg again, but it's really a human in the loop approach here. And by having this data, by having real data, you can accelerate decisions, right? So you can make better decisions because you're not doing it based on maybe consensus or maybe observations or ad hoc or a feel. You have the actual data to make decisions that matter, right? And make them faster. And sometimes because you have the data, you can even automate those decisions. So we have a couple examples of folks that did just that I'm going to cover. And then you're going to hear from my colleague, Chad. He's going to talk a bit more about other examples. So I'm going to cover RS Components and Best Buy Canada. So RS Components, they supply electronic parts, equipment, really techy stuff. They do it through e-commerce and they serve 32 countries, personalized technical content. This says 10 languages and now it's actually 12. So they have an awful lot of content volume, very aggressive schedules, and they want to hit the market. They want to hit the global market as fast as they can. So they definitely have these, speed to market challenges. Best Buy Canada, retail mega brand, I think actually they're like the second biggest retailer in all of Canada. So huge global. I love Best Buy myself, so can't say enough about them. They wanted to shorten their global time to market. So they had a growing body of electronic content and they were having a really hard time keeping up with those demands. They were really living those friction points that I talked about just a bit ago, right? They were really living it and they needed a solution. So let's talk about RS Components real quick. So like I said, the issue is they wanted to address 12 languages, not just 10. They wanted to translate their entire product offering catalog And they wanted to publish to all languages concurrently, right? Not do one and then everything else, but hit it all in one go. We put a technology in place that combined our translation management software with our machine translation software. So it is that automatic translation, smart translation management, and we integrated that into their existing content workflow. So it didn't necessarily, people didn't have to relearn their jobs or figure out new ways of doing it. It was really an augmentation strategy, if you will. They were able to then apply that to 30 million words across 12 languages. And as you see, the results were quite impressive, right? So, oops. Sorry about that. They shifted from manual to automatic translation, and they had publishing times that were about 5 to 10 days. So that's like what, like 2 weeks? That went to 1 to 2 days, and a noticeable budget reduction. Now, I wanted to bring up the quote, and if you go to the press release that we did about this particular customer and read their case studies, you'll see it too. So the person we were working with, Dominic, they said customers today demand content in their own language. That's what we've been talking about all along, right? And while it sounds easy, it is difficult to ensure that the information is up to date, consistent, and to the highest standards. And that's that piece, right? It's not just content for content's sake. It's relevant, personalized, it's real, okay? So let's look at Best Buy real quick. So they've been doing fine for a while, and they hit an unexpected peak. They got hit with an awful lot of content, an updated product catalog, and they realized that they needed 75 translators to address that backlog, and they didn't have 75 translators hanging around. So they needed to do something, and they turned to technology. They were able to introduce machine translation into their automated workflow. So they had a workflow that was manual in nature. They introduced an enterprise machine translation software into the mix, and with that, we're able to address a batch of new product SKUs, basically new products, 20,000 words, more than that, within 2 days. What they realized is that they were able to actually pass 90% of their general content through machine translation, through our machine translation, with zero intervention, and they realized significant cost savings and cost savings in money and cost reduction, right, because of the efficiencies that we brought to the table. So Best Buy was able to strike that balance between quality, cost, and long-term performance. Now, I talked a lot about the technology, and like I said, I'm very passionate about technology, but it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And the platform is only as effective as what you do with it and how you leverage it within your operations. So I'm going to turn this over to Chad, and he's going to talk about a couple of customers he's worked with directly and what they've done. Chad?
Great. Well, thank you, Jane. I think, first of all, we'll look at Kingfisher. For those who aren't aware, they're a large international home improvements company, and they have both in-store and e-commerce experiences. And recently, Celine and her team have kind of started to adjust how they localize and translate content and adjust their ways of working. Celine, question for you, for the audience. Would you mind sharing maybe the catalyst, some of the things that kind of pushed the change forward for Kingfisher and the approach of how you're handling localization and translation today?
Of course, and it's better if I unmute myself. So just to give some initial background, so we've been working with SDL since 2016, working on a wide range of different content types, going from very technical product data to videos, articles, and so on. And we had obviously always technology in mind. We are very keen to use technology whenever it can be possible, just to help us work faster, to be more efficient. And if on top of that, it can also bring a benefit from a cost perspective. That's obviously a bonus. So we've been in discussions with SDL since early 2019 on machine translation. There was not much progress in terms of what could be eligible for machine translation and how we could be handling the solution to fit our needs. So and in the meantime, we had a new CEO joining, onboarding the group. So he joined at the back end of 2019 and presented his new strategy back in June 2020. So it's fairly recently. His focus, so Thierry Garnier's focus, is very much to increase speed to market, and he's repeatedly said that he wants something or projects to be done and better done than perfect. So that was very much what has pushed us to go down that route and to accelerate those discussions with SDL and make sure that we do use technology to follow that strategy. And here we are. As of the 2nd of November, we've started using machine translation with post editing. So it's not the raw machine translation. We also have a layer of post editing that happens afterwards.
Awesome. Well, Celine, I love that quote, better done than perfect. I think we all can walk away and apply that. So that's a great leadership quote for us. Well, Celine, now, so you've recently kind of undergone this transformation and kind of looking at your new ways of working and trying some machine translation and post edit. If this is successful for Kingfisher, how do you see this kind of evolving?
So it is a bit too early to say. Ultimately, we've only started using the solution as of the 2nd of November, so barely 2 weeks. What we'll take the time and do in December, we will just reflect on how the first month has gone, and dependent on what the outcome is really, we will potentially consider customize engines to our terminology, because the DIY industry, the home improvement industry, can be very technical, can be very specific. So if there is any added value that the customized engine could bring, that's definitely something we'll be considering. And then the next step for us will be potentially considering other content types as well to process through machine translation. So those are the next steps for us, really.
Wonderful. Well, Celine, we are looking forward to the outcomes, right, and the success that Kingfisher has. So thank you for your time today and sharing.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, so as we've just heard from Celine, I think speed and content value, definitely key drivers here. Of course, cost savings, who doesn't want that in today's world? But let's take another look at a different kind of market space and a different situation. Jane, if you can advance for us. And we'll jump in and we'll talk about something kind of on a far other spectrum with Under Armour. Now, Under Armour over the past several years has continued to evolve, and you know they've wanted to continue to bring that kind of brand creativity and the voice, the underdog kind of voice to their customers, and they needed to make sure that remained intact with their digital voice. And we've been working closely with them over the past several years to really develop that content tiering approach, right? When do you need to transcreate the message? When do you need to localize? And when can you just do a straight translation? And for a brand like Under Armour, who are the underdogs, if you will, from a campaigns standpoint, they go heavy on the transcreation. It's got to be creative. They need to make sure that voice of being the underdog and the blue collar hard worker that has to come across. So it's very high touch and creative in terms of the content that's created. However, as you go down through the tiers, when we start getting to the e-commerce aspect and how much business they do online, we find that within e-commerce, they actually, they'll tier their content also separately. They'll have kind of the marketing content or the branding things that really describe and explain their products. And that will actually kind of go through localization with a bit of transcreation, so a little bit of creativity, if you will, that's applied to the localization process. And they even include that with preparing their content for their A/B testing, right? So as they're working with their A/B testing and seeing what's going to work, they include at that point in time up front in the process of actually making sure that that content is tailored specifically to carry that voice through. But at the same time on the e-commerce website, as you can imagine, product specifications are needed, right? You have to have content pertaining to the specifications. And what Under Armour does is they say, hey, for content specifications, for product specifications, this is a one-to-one translation, and we're happy to go with that. So in the case of an Under Armour, I think they're looking at, they look at cost, they're looking at content value, they're looking at scale in the ability to deliver this globally, and they're looking at speed. All this are driving factors as well. These are those characteristics, those attributes that kind of are relevant to all of our customers. Jane and Mathen, back over to you.
Great. So I just wanted to, sorry, Nathan, I was going to just kind of do the quick takeaway and then give it to you because I think you have so much more to add. I just wanted to make sure that, after we've said and done, just kind of realization when you think about personalization, when you think about your e-commerce strategy, think about language. Is it standing in the way of your ability to personalize, and consider the technology? So Nathan, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there.
No. But before that, are there any questions? I think is to the audience.
Matthew, let me jump in here. We've had a couple of questions through, and I'm going to take the liberty of jamming them together into two questions. So apologies to people that I'm mastering their question. One is around the machine learning, and the other is about category and specific vocabularies or work. So on the machine learning, the question is, how does that work with real humans? So do you give it to machine learning, you get what you get, it's always right? Do you review it? Does it learn? So that's machine learning, how does that work? And the other one then is, we've heard in particular about RS and also from Celine, relatively technical areas with lots of jargon, serial numbers, specific terms. Are there categories of retail or countries or areas that are more challenging than others to get right? So there are your two questions, Mathen. ML, categories that are more difficult.
That question could probably be answered by dear Jane.
Oh, yes, sure. Yeah, no, let me take the first one. So I'll take the technical question, the machine learning, and how does it work with people, and what's the foundation? And so just kind of brace yourself here. It's going to be a bit of a long answer. So machine learning, machine translation, it's been around for a bit. It's evolved as time has gone on, as all technology has. It's brought more of those AI learning elements. It started off as a very rule-based, like here's a word, here's a translation, and it's evolved. So the latest iteration right now is neural machine translation. So the way it's trained, because underneath the covers it's language models essentially, is by using content, right? So it's trained on content and it learns from content, and every time you use it, it gets smarter and smarter and smarter. So how do you use it in terms of a workflow? How do you use it in a human in the loop process? So remember when we said one size does not fit all? I think that I'm going to say that the answer is one size does not fit all. It depends on what you're doing. It depends on the language. It depends on the content. It depends on the application. So for example, if you want to make a chatbot speak in multiple languages, you're going to potentially leverage some additional training to make your models fit that use case better, and you will have something that's not very, that's not like human in the loop, right? Because it's a chatbot, it has to be real. Now, if you're translating content for a website, or you're translating brochures, or you're translating content that has multiple review stages, absolutely, you would have you could have a human in the loop, right? So you could review, you could do, and I think Celine talked about a post-edit process. If it's a machine translation, post-edit is a whole area that has a lot of practices. It has evolved in time as machine translation has and as technology has, to allow us to work together and collaborate. So the answer is there's many ways of doing it, and the way you approach the training part of it is, one, the machine translation vendors will come with pre-trained engines. You have to think about, are these engines pre-trained, or engines models, are they pre-trained on business content, or are they pre-trained on content that, like casual conversations, right? You want to make sure it fits your parameters, if you will, and is there an opportunity for you to tune it, to adapt it? Like, we offer adaptation in a variety of ways, some other folks as well, and for some it's more of a black box. So hopefully this very long answer, I think I covered every single area that was asked in that techno combination question. Yeah, Nathan, Ian, did I miss anything?
No, so what I'm taking from that is the learning as part of machine learning. So really training it and working with it. It does lead on then to the sort of start to finish timescale. Again, maybe Celine wants to comment on this, but in terms of, one of our delegates now is so convinced they want to start tomorrow. You've got capacity to start. What is a typical reasonable time to go from here's my catalog to it's doing it automatically, I can go on holiday? Are we talking days, weeks, months, or is this a never end? It's like having teenagers, they never leave home and just suck your money. Where does it fit in that spectrum of happiness?
Maybe I would ask Celine can you give us your time frame, what you have set when you embarked on this journey, and maybe chat just to elaborate further. I will also, after their answers, I'd like to also give a short feedback about which languages to concentrate on. That was the second question. Maybe
lovely. Let's move through it then while we still have some time.
Absolutely. So the time frame we had in mind when we started those discussions back in 2019 was as soon as possible. We were very keen to start using the technology. But then as the discussions were not coming to the outcome we wanted, we asked SDL to do some analysis on which, out of everything that we create and we translate, out of everything, what will be the best candidate for machine translation? So there was this initial analysis that was provided back to us saying that instruction manuals, so anything that typically you'll find when buying a product, you'll find an instruction manual. That was the best content type that was eligible for machine translation. But then considering that the actual product technical data was representing most of our volume, I was very keen to have this content as well included as part of the machine translation. So what SDL has done is they went back to the drawing board, reconsidered their position, and they obviously finally recommended to have MTP applied to those two different content types. So that was, and then once we got the green light to go ahead, that was pretty quick to implement, and I was quite surprised actually on how quick SDL was able to turn this around. So essentially, it was pretty positive for us.
Excellent. Don't tell anybody it was SDL, Celine. It was all your hard work and planning. I realise that. Fantastic. Chad, did you have a thought on that?
Just a quick follow-up. I mean, I think whenever you go through this process, the biggest time frame that you have to take into account is just adoption. So it's not getting the technology set up. It's not actually running this stuff through the technology. It's going through and evaluating first what content will fit for you, or to what level it will fit for you, and understanding, again, content value, what quality it needs to be. Once you get through that process, the first cycle through is the most, I'll say, the most important, right? We have many customers who will try out and they'll try to test. I think Celine has some good tests that she's doing internally as well. Sometimes customers will let their internal stakeholders know it's going to be translated through machine translation, and other times they don't say anything, right? So we've seen all different types of taste tests, if you will. So I think it's the biggest start is the adoption, or that's the biggest kind of barrier, if you will. Once you get through the adoption and the first cycle, from there on, it's a pretty quick transition.
Excellent. Well, look, Chad, thank you. Also, Celine. Mathan, our time is drawing to an end, unfortunately. So let me hand back to you for your closing thoughts. And am I wrong in thinking that you have a little giveaway as well for those who've made it through this far? Over to you.
We do, in fact. We have a couple of interesting goodies. The one is the question, I think, from everyone who joined today. First of all, thank you for joining today. Is where do I see myself in this whole content supply chain journey, and where do I feel fit, comfortable? So we created a self-assessment tool for you so that you can evaluate and assess yourself to position yourself. This is number one. To take it even further, and for those who would like to get their hands dirty, we have also created a 2-week MT trial to say, okay, I don't want to wait for anything. I really want to get my hands dirty and start already inputting. Just as a final remark, because this is, I think, important, worldwide there are more than 7,000 languages spoken, and we have more than 7,000 languages on a global scale. The question is, where do I start? And this is also at SDL we put together something of a model. This is based on the CSA model to say, okay, what are the languages and what are the industries I should concentrate on? And to be more specific, 139 languages out of 7,000 are the ones we should concentrate on, which also almost makes 90% of the overall portion. And the combination, as I said, with the goodies and also the approach is where you can see yourself to position on the one hand, getting your hands dirty, and of course, talking to us. We want to know more about where you feel not only comfortable, where you would like to go, and we would like to give you our insight and what we have learned, continuously learning further, and help you and support you to get where you want to go. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. There's nothing nicer than a giveaway. And when we mail you later with details of the day and the deck, then we'll include the Mathan's Kind goodies as well. So obviously, it's the Christmas season, Mathan. Thank you very much. So look, may I just also add our thanks to Jane, Chad, Celine and Mathan for their contribution. Thank you all very much. And it's a pleasure hearing from you. Such an interesting topic now as over peaking into 2021, everyone's mind is turning to cross-border, extending where we can sell, and also increasing our connection with the consumer so we can increase our connection with our consumers' wallets. So all that's really important. I hope you found this session useful. We'll be following up, and I'm sure we'll return to this again very soon. But in the meantime, thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.